This is a homily for the first Sunday of Advent. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 13, verses 33 to 37. The first Sunday of Advent is the beginning of the Church's liturgical year. Our English word Advent comes to us from the Latin adventus, which means arrival. The Greek equivalent is parousia. In Hellenistic Greek, parousia had become a technical word for the arrival of an emperor, a king, a governor, or a high official into a town or province. Early Christians took over the word to designate the coming of Christ in glory to judge the world. Some of the readings of Advent do look forward to the coming of Christ in glory to judge the world. But the season of Advent also looks backwards to the first coming of Christ at Bethlehem. Advent is therefore an in-between time, the already but the not yet. During Advent we are in a waiting room. In the words of the theologian Fleming Rutledge, Advent is the time between the first coming of Christ and the second coming, between darkness and dawn, between the kingdoms of this world and the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ. It is not the time of fulfillment. It is the time of waiting. It is not the time of seeing face to face. It is the time of seeing through a glass darkly, in the words of St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, verse 12. We celebrate the Nativity of the Lord on December the 25th, but none of the Gospels tell us the date of his birth. Both Matthew and Luke agree that Jesus was born during the reign of King Herod the Great. We know that Herod died in 4 BC, so Jesus must have been born before then, and there are indications in the Gospel that he was born towards the end of Herod's reign. That is probably the best that we can hope for. Why then did the Church choose December the 25th as the date for Christmas? In 274 AD, the Roman Emperor Aurelian decreed a feast throughout the empire in honour of Natale Solus Invicti, the birth of the unconquered sun. The feast was to be celebrated on December the 25th, the day of the winter solstice. The emperor's hope was that the feast would help to unite and strengthen his vast empire. The birth of the sun god was celebrated on the date of the winter solstice because the progressive lengthening of days following the solstice symbolically mirrored the growth of the newly born sun god. Under the reign of the Emperor Constantine, Christians were free to practice their faith openly, and Constantine favoured Christianity among the many religions of his subjects. As a consequence, Christianity grew rapidly. Rodney Stark, professor of sociology and comparative religion at the University of Washington, gives us an idea of the rapid growth of Christianity in the Roman Empire from 40 AD to the middle of the 4th century. According to the figures that he provides, 56.5% of the population of the empire had become Christian by the middle of the 4th century. But those figures also mean that over 40% of the population remained pagan. As the Church grew in numbers and influence, it could have attempted to suppress pagan festivals, such as the birth of the sun god, but instead it adopted a more subtle approach. The Belgian liturgical theologian Adrian Nocent explains what happened. The liturgy of Advent gradually took shape in the Church beginning in the 4th century. Toward the end of this century, we find in Gaul and Spain a period of preparation for the feast of Christmas. The feast itself had just been established at Rome as a kind of Christianization of the pagan celebration of the victorious sun, Natale Solis Invicti, birth of the unconquered sun, or celebration of the winter solstice, when the sun triumphed over the winter mists. The Church of Rome saw in the natural occurrence a symbol of Christ, victorious over the dark powers of evil, and took the occasion to celebrate on December the 25th the birth of Christ according to the flesh. So, at the time of the winter solstice, when the pagan world celebrated the birth of the sun god, Christians decided that this was a perfect time to celebrate not the birth of the sun god, but the birth of the Son of God. When the world was darkest, there was born unto us Christ, who is the light of the world. Let me come back to the idea of Advent as an in-between time. Let's walk along the banks of the Tiber in Rome until we reach Ponte Fabricio, the oldest bridge in Rome still existing in its original state. Here you can see it on Google Maps. Ponte Fabricio was built in 62 BC and it spans half of the Tiber River, connecting the left bank of the Tiber to Tiber Island. The tall building that you can see in the background in this photograph is the main synagogue of Rome. You'll see on the eastern entrance to the bridge a well-worn stone carving. It represents the Roman god Janus. Janus is the Roman god of beginnings. Janus is always depicted with one head but two faces, looking in opposite directions, as you can see here. The month of January, the beginning of our new year, is named after Janus, the god of beginnings. And isn't that what we do at the beginning of a new year? We look in two directions. We look back over the past year and we look forward to the year ahead. And that is precisely what we do at Advent. We look back to the first coming of Christ at Bethlehem, but during Advent we also look forward to the second coming of Christ. Adrian Nocent tells us that the fathers of the Church, especially Saint Leo, that is Pope Leo the Great, linked the Lord's coming to Bethlehem with his second coming in glory at the end of time. In their eyes, despite the lowly state of the Lord in the crib, Christmas is a victory feast, connected both with the redemptive triumph of the cross and with the final triumph of Christ at his return. We reaffirm our faith in the second coming of Christ every time we recite the Creed at Mass. We say, "He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead." Many of our contemporaries, however, view the idea of a second coming with wry amusement. In the photograph that you can see here, there is an apartment block overlooking Balmoral Beach in Sydney. That apartment block was built sometime in the 1950s. However, before it was constructed, another rather unusual structure stood on the very same site. And here you can see that building. It was known as the Star Amphitheatre. It doesn't look much like an amphitheatre looking up at it from the beach, but from above looking down towards the beach, you can see the amphitheatre quite clearly. it was designed to face the north head of Sydney Harbour. The foundation stone was laid on July the 28th, 1923, and it was completed just over a year later at a cost of £20,000. It was built by a group known as the Order of the Star in the East. The amphitheatre was demolished in 1951. The sole purpose of the Order of the Star in the East was to prepare themselves for an expected world teacher. They put it this way: "We believe that a great teacher will soon appear in the world, and we wish so to live now that we may be worthy to know him when he comes." Now, because the amphitheatre was built facing Sydney Heads, the Sydney tabloid press at that time had a field day. They gave their readers the impression that the amphitheatre had been built so that members of the Order of the Star would have box seats for the second coming. The second coming, not of a great teacher, but of Jesus himself. The tabloid press gleefully conjured up the idea of Jesus walking on the water through Sydney Heads. Today we'd rightly dismiss this as fake news. It certainly wasn't what members of the Order of the Star actually believed, but the daily tabloids didn't want the facts to get in the way of a sensational newspaper story. Now, as Christians, we do believe that Jesus will come again. But the Scriptures make it very clear that we do not know when or where it will happen. But if, hypothetically, we did know that Jesus was going to come again, and that he was going to come to Sydney, walking on the water, through Sydney Heads, then it would be a feeding frenzy for the media. No one could ever claim that Jesus came, but they didn't know about it. Advent reminds us that Jesus came 2,000 years ago. It also reminds us that he will come again, at a time we do not know. But just as importantly, it reminds us that Jesus will come again today. Yes, today, but not walking on the water through the heads of Sydney Harbour. And that is why today's Gospel tells us to stay awake. The words vigilant waiting capture the mood of this first Sunday of Lent. The word that Mark uses here is gregorete. That verb is used 22 times in the New Testament. Although it does mean wake up from sleep, its predominant meaning in the New Testament is metaphorical. In other words, be vigilant, be alert, be attentive. So the command to stay awake is saying more than don't fall asleep. It involves living in a state of greater mindfulness. In the words of Fleming Rutledge, the Lord has come, he will come. The life of the Christian Church is located and lived at the intersection of those two Advents. And in the meantime, the time being, as W.H. Auden calls it, we stay awake, like the doorkeeper, by watching for signs of his presence in the most unlikely places and the most unlikely people. That is a summons to be attentive to the present moment, to the here and now. That is the message of Eckhart Tolle's bestseller, The Power of Now. He asks the question, are you resisting your here and now? Some people would always rather be somewhere else. Their here is never good enough. In the Zen tradition, there is a story about a woman who is being pursued by a tiger, and the tiger is quickly gaining ground. Soon the tiger will pounce upon her. She comes to the edge of a cliff. If she jumps over the cliff, she will die on the rocks below. If she stands still at the edge of the cliff, she will be devoured by the tiger. Just as the tiger approaches, the woman manages to scramble over the edge of a cliff, holding on for dear life to a branch protruding from the cliff face. She is just out of the tiger's reach, but she can't hold on forever. What will happen? As she dangles from the branch, she suddenly notices a cluster of wild strawberries growing in a crevice in the rock face. She reaches out to grab a strawberry and eats it with delight. Ah! End of story. Now, you may object, you can't end the story with her dangling between life and death. What happened next? Well, you're asking the wrong question. The whole point of the story is that in life we are so obsessed with the tiger above or the rocks below that we fail to savour the strawberry of the moment. Now that story is obviously not an all-embracing philosophy of life, but it nevertheless contains a profound and sadly overlooked truth. Charlie Brown is in sad shape. He's in luck. Dr. Lucy is in. Good morning, sir. Sit right down. Fine. I was afraid I might need an appointment. What can you do when life seems to be passing you by? Follow me. I want to show you something. See the horizon over there. See how big this world is. See how much room there is for everybody. Have you ever seen any other worlds? No? As far as you know, this is the only world there is, right? Right. There are no other worlds for you to live in, right? Right. You were born to live in this world, right? Right. Well, live in it then! 5 cents, please. Dr. Lucy delivers an important message. Be attentive to the here and now, to the strawberry of the moment. That means listening to what truly matters to you, being attentive to that tiny whisper inside your head. In their book, Success Built to Last, Jerry Porras, Stuart Emery and Mark Thompson seek to identify what it is that successful people have in common. They distill their findings into a set of simple practices to help other people transform their lives. One key piece of advice they offer is this: listen to what matters to you. They have this to say: although there may be nothing intrinsically wrong with having stuff, too many of us get lost on a treadmill of acquisition, chasing whatever we believe things will go better with. The trouble is, you can never get enough of what you don't really need to make you happy. No wonder folks become chronically depressed. As the Rolling Stones belted out, I can't get no satisfaction. For satisfaction, you have to listen to what matters to you, not what is blaring from the mouths of friends, foes, and family. Over the last 3 weeks, we've been reading from chapter 25 of St. Matthew's Gospel, and the message has been, be attentive to all that the present moment is saying to you, to the here and now. Firstly, the parable of the 10 bridesmaids, 5 of whom were wise and 5 were foolish. The wise bridesmaids were prepared. They were ready for the possibility that the bridegroom may come at night, which he did. The foolish bridesmaids were unprepared. They had totally misread the situation. In the parable of the talents, 3 servants are entrusted with varying amounts of money. The first 2 double the amount given to them. The 3rd servant didn't seize the opportunity of the moment. He buried the money given to him and did nothing with it. And in the scene of judgment, when the king separates people one from another, like a shepherd separating sheep from goats, no one actually recognized what was happening in the present moment, namely, that Christ himself was present in their midst in the very least of their brothers and sisters. Even those who did reach out in compassion to the hungry and thirsty, to the naked, the sick and the imprisoned, they didn't realize that it was to Christ himself that they were reaching out. So a key theme of Advent is be attentive to God's presence in the present moment. But the message of Jesus is challenging. It was 2,000 years ago, and it is today. One characteristic of Jewish humour that I've always enjoyed is the ability that Jews have to laugh at themselves. And so a Jewish husband returns from the local village quite distraught. He tells his wife, "Rebecca, I've just heard a terrible rumour that is spreading through the town like wildfire. The Messiah has come." His wife seems totally unperturbed by this news. "My husband, what is so terrible about that? Why are you so upset?" "I'm upset because after years of sweat and toil, we have finally found prosperity. We have 1,000 head of cattle, our barns are full to overflowing, and all our trees are heavily laden with fruit. What if the Messiah tells us to give it all away and follow him?" Calm down, dear husband. We Jews have endured great suffering and hardship down through the ages. We have been enslaved by the Egyptians, overwhelmed by the Assyrians, exiled by the Babylonians, oppressed by the Greeks, slaughtered by the Romans, herded into ghettos by the Christians. We have endured the Holocaust and the hostility of the Arab world, and yet we have survived. Just have faith, dear husband. When the Messiah comes, we will find a way to deal with him. Advent summons us to be awake to the Lord's presence among us today, eager and ready, watching for signs of his presence in the most unlikely places and the most unlikely people.